Hello, comrades, and welcome to another video on the Russian Revolution area of Study 2. This is actually our final content-based video. It is a wrapping up, if you will, of this entire area of study, and indeed of the entire study of the Russian Revolution. We'll be analyzing the new society and considering continuities and changes that have taken place from the time of the Tsarist regime to the new regime of the Communist Party. So in this video, we're going to cover a few different topics, including women's rights, education and literacy, artistic movements, political repression, which we may discover is an example of continuity throughout this entire study, daily life, and modernization. So let's get started. So we're going to start by looking at women in the new society. This quote from Alexandra Kollontai is one to make a note of. No more domestic servitude of women, no more inequality within the family. The woman in the communist city no longer depends on her husband, but her work. It is not her husband, but her robust arms which will support her. So let's start by looking at changes to women's rights. So female members of the Bolsheviks, who were known as Bolsheviki, played an important role in preparing for the October Revolution. Women such as Inessa Armand, who we'll discuss shortly, and Alexandra Kollontai, who we'll discuss in a bit more detail, were well respected in the party. And after the October Revolution, they put women's rights on the political agenda for the new regime. However, there were differences in how some of the changes that took place were reacted to in the cities and the countryside. So in rural areas, women were given the right to act as head of the household, and they were granted equal rights in land ownership. Sounds great. However, peasant women were suspicious of external authorities, and with all of the nationalization that was taking place in many other aspects of society, such as nationalization of industry, there were rumors that women were to be nationalized and shared. So Bolsheviki activists sent to the countryside were often abused by village women rather than welcomed. So some of the changes to women's rights weren't communicated well enough to women in the countryside and were not received well. However, in urban areas such as Petrograd and Moscow, there were huge changes and positive moves made. So in December 1917, so, you know, a month and a half after the October seizure of power, the decree on marriage was passed. It specified that marriage was an act of mutual consent, that married couples could take either the wife or the husband's surname, whereas previously it was traditionally the husband's surname that was taken when a couple became married. Divorce was made easier through a straightforward civil process. And generally speaking, marriage was a civil rather than religious process. Also, women were guaranteed the right to equal pay in the workplace. So a few huge changes and huge advances in women's rights. Zhenot Del. So in 1919, the Women's Department of the Communist Party, otherwise known as Zhenot Del, was formed to promote women's rights. It was initially headed by Inessa Armand until her death in 1920, and then after that it was headed by Alexandra Kollontai, who I mentioned both of those before. This is Inessa Armand. She joined the SDs when they were the SDs, a combination of the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, in 1903. Then she met Lenin in Paris in 1910. She became a leading Bolshevik and is believed to have had an affair with Lenin for a couple of years. But even after their affair came to an end, she was still greatly respected by Lenin, and they remained firm friends. So Zhenot Del, back to the Women's Department of the Communist Party. Zhenot Del's programs included creches, like nurseries for children, communal kitchens and laundries, so as to liberate women from household chores, which were seen as ineffective and inefficient uses of time. So these programs allowed women to get more involved in the party and more involved in the workplace. Efforts were also made to improve women's literacy and industrial skills. Here's a great quote from electrical engineer Ella Shistia. She remarked that the revolution gave me the right to feel equal to any man. It gave me the right to work, to study what I wanted to study. So there were huge moves made by Jeannot Del to lead Russia to be more of an egalitarian society for women. Alexandra Kollontai. So Alexandra Kollontai, pictured here, was a leading Bolshevik and champion of women's rights. She was one of the few Bolshevik leaders to give immediate support to Lenin's April theses when he returned from exile in April 1917. And she actually canvassed on his behalf. She campaigned for Bolshevik members to support Lenin's April theses. She was one of the few women to hold office in national government anywhere in the world when she was appointed Commissar of People's Welfare in 1917. So quite a significant individual in the fact that she was one of the few women to be in government anywhere in the world. After Inessa Rahman's death in 1920, she became the head of Jeannot Del, as I mentioned before. At the 10th Party Congress of 1921, Kollontai was the chief spokesperson for the Workers' Opposition Group. So that was a faction of the Bolshevik Party that was committed to workers having more control and unions being more active. She is one of the few old Bolsheviks to survive Stalin's purges, dying peacefully in retirement in 1952. So Alexandra Kollontai was a champion of women's rights. She was a great supporter of Lenin. She held significant roles in the government, and she was a leading member of the Workers' Opposition, the main faction at the 10th Party Congress. So a significant individual to make a note of. Women's liberation. So Kollontai advocated for a woman's right to a fulfilled marriage with a partner of her choice and to be freed from the bonds of marriage. She said that under communism, the satisfaction of one's sexual desires would be as simple and unimportant as drinking a glass of water. That's a famous quote by her. However, historian Sheila Fitzpatrick argues that Kollontai was a believer in love rather than the glass of water theory of sex that was often attributed to her. So although important gains were made, women's liberation continued to be challenging, partly because patriarchal attitudes were entrenched in Russian society, and so undermined some of these decrees, including the decree on marriage. And that's including within the party, because, you know, patriarchal attitudes are entrenched throughout society, and they were particularly so in Russia in the early 20th century. Funds and experienced staff for communal kitchens and creches were lacking, so those Jeannot Del programs of creches and communal kitchens were often underfunded. And women had more opportunities, but were still expected to do the housework. So there were more opportunities to work, but because of those patriarchal attitudes in society, they were still expected to run the household. So here are a couple of propaganda posters relating to women. You'll recognize this one from the front of our textbook. It's titled Emancipated Women, that means freed women, build socialism. So we see a strong looking woman with a headscarf and some sort of tool, perhaps a gun, with a factory in the background, so representing women's rights to work and women being key to industry in Russia. This poster is from 1926. And here we have what October gave to women. As you'll see in the, if we look at the woman in the image, she's wearing red, representing communism and representing this socialist utopia. She's holding a hammer, representing her ability to work and to be an active member of the industrial workers of Russia. We've got, as is often the case, we've got a rising sun representing a new hope for women. And in the background here, you'll see schools. So women's literacy and education was a key aspect of improved women's rights in Russia. So let's now look at education in the new society. Lenin is quoted as saying, "The illiterate person stands outside of politics. First, it is necessary to teach him his ABCs. Without it, there are only rumors, fairy tales, and prejudices, but not politics." So education, and particularly in literacy, was a key goal of the new regime. First of all, this subheading might not make sense right now, but as we continue, it will make more sense. We are not slaves, slaves we are not. So improving the literacy and education of ordinary Russians was considered crucial for the Bolsheviks, who believed that science, education, and socialism would lead to the creation of a new type of Soviet man and woman. So these literacy programs started with the Red Army. As you know, from 1918 to 1920, the Red Army was involved in the Civil War. So in April 1918, compulsory reading lessons were introduced to the Red Army. As they marched, soldiers sang 2 days of study, then a week in battle, 2 days with pencils, a week with bayonets. The head of training for the Red Army, Nikolai Podvoisky, declared, "Our word is our best weapon." So they're quite powerful words for the head of training for the Red Army. So even though they were entrenched in civil war, the head of training still believes that literacy is the most powerful asset for Red Army soldiers. So here is why "We are not slaves, slaves we are not" is the subheading for this slide, because Bolshevik activist Dora Elkina was sent to teach soldiers how to read. One day she wrote on the board, "We are not slaves, slaves we are not." And this sentence struck a chord with the soldiers as it spoke to the revolutionary ideals of respect and freedom, and returned them to the idea of what their role was in Tsarist times, where they felt more like slaves in society. So this phrase, "We are not slaves, slaves we are not," became a common sentence in reading texts of the 1920s and 1930s, and it was the first sentence that millions of Russians learned to read. There were vast literacy improvements. So in the 1920s, thousands of reading rooms were established across the Soviet Republic in both urban and rural areas. Volunteers traveled to the countryside teaching people to read. In May 1918, primary and secondary education was standardized. Classes were free, co-educational, so with boys and girls, and compulsory. So the Commissar for Enlightenment was one of the key roles in the Soviet government, and that is the Commissar of Arts, Literacy, and Education. So Anatoly Lunacharsky was the Commissar for Enlightenment, and he implemented many progressive ideas for education, many of which are still being used today and are still considered quite cutting edge in education, even in 2022. The communist drive for literacy achieved considerable results. So in 1900, so during Tsar Nicholas's reign, only 23% of Russians could read and write. 1926, so that's at the latter end of our area of study, 51% of Russians could read and write. So more than double that of 1900. And by 1939, so during, at the outbreak of World War II, 90% of Russians could read and write. So there were vast improvements in literacy. Here are a few propaganda posters relating to education and literacy. So this one, "Lenin Leads the Way" from 1918, shows Lenin revolutionary leader in front and center, well, not front, but central in the image. And he is teaching a young girl how to read. So this relates not only to literacy, but to equality of the genders. Dawning Literacy from 1919, we can see many, again, women with books in their hands learning how to read. And here we've got knowledge, and again, with Dawning Literacy, we see again a rising sun representing a new age, and as the title suggests, Dawning Literacy. It's a new age for literacy and learning how to read. And this final one, Knowledge Will Break the Chains of Slavery from 1919. So we see many books sitting atop chains, and this is chains are obviously a significant symbol of the Russian Revolution in the propaganda of the Russian Revolution. And so this poster with a pile of books, a hand with a quill, is saying that by learning to read, by going through education, we will break free from our proverbial chains. Here are a few more. Prepare reading rooms. So reading rooms, as I said, thousands were set up throughout the Civil War. And this poster is from 1919, and it is just encouraging people in the countryside to set up reading rooms so that they can learn how to read. Here we've got the illiterate and the literate. So as you can see, the top row shows an illiterate person. He's scratching his head over here. And by the end here, he appears to be in his deathbed with a crying child, while the literate person is standing confidently, is able to trade with this farmer here. We can see that even though it ends with a similar scene, the child is much more confident, and this poster is trying to show that by learning to read, you will have a healthier and better life. And finally, we've got from 1920, this poster, the illiterate. This one's pretty obvious, walking over a cliff with a blindfold. So basically saying that if you do not learn how to read, then you are blind and will not be able to see for yourself, think for yourself. So artistic experimentation in the new society. Vladimir Mayakovsky said that what we need is not a dead cathedral of art where dead masterpieces can languish, but a living factory of the human spirit. We need raw art, raw words, raw deeds. Art should be everywhere, on the streets, in streetcars, in factories, and in workers' homes. So clearly the Bolsheviks valued art in the new society. So let's have a look at some revolutionary styles and movements. So even before the revolution, Russia was going through a period of artistic experimentation. Often at times of revolution, at times of great change, art really flourishes. And we see that throughout history. History really repeats itself in that regard. Now this expanded in the 1920s, and influential movements included futurism, which glorified technology and rejected past traditions, proletarian culture movement, prolet cult, abandoned traditional modes of artistic representation, and constructivism, where art was constructed with social and political purpose and led to constructivist styles of sculpture and architecture. Public sculptures of Tsarist leaders were replaced by busts of Marx, Engels, and other revolutionaries. There were, particularly after Lenin's death, there were thousands of sculptures dedicated to Lenin. Painters experimented with geometric form and proletarian themes, industrial themes. Writers wrote on themes of a new world, because we are living in a new world at this time. One group of classical musicians performed as an orchestra without a conductor, which was revolutionary in the music world, as this was to reflect their socialist convictions of equality. Inspiration for revolutionary themes came from factories, steels, tools, coal, Civil War battles, and utopian visions of the future. In 1918, on May Day, So to commemorate Moscow's first May Day, the International Workers' Day in the Northern Hemisphere, under Soviet rule in 1918, Lenin suggested that the capital be decorated to give it an appearance entirely different from any other city in Europe. Now, this project grew far beyond Lenin's idea when Commissar of Enlightenment Anatoly Lunacharsky, who we mentioned in the education section of this video, gave artists free rein. Trucks displaying striking artworks were parked throughout the city center. Trees were painted red, purple, blue, and yellow, and geometric and cubist murals were painted throughout the city. This went a bit beyond what Lenin had hoped, and he wasn't actually all that happy with it, but it did show the bursting of artistic experimentation and artistic expression during the early years of the new regime. Propaganda, we've seen countless examples of propaganda, but because literacy levels initially were low in the Russian population, visual imagery was the main tool of propaganda, as we have seen countless times. The Bolsheviks made ready use of the artists who were willing to work for them. And one example of propaganda that we haven't really studied is brightly painted trains carrying Bolshevik agitational propaganda, otherwise known as agitprop. And these trains traveled across the countryside. Agitprop staff, so the staff on the trains, gave speeches and handed out posters and pamphlets wherever they went. So this is a means of distributing propaganda to the Russian people. And the agitprop trains were accompanied by theater troupes and brass bands, and often contained a movie theater. Many Russians at this time saw their first moving picture film in an agitprop train. So here we have an agitprop train during the Russian Civil War. We can see fat capitalists with sort of hideous faces, monstrous faces, commanding a blindfolded white soldier over here to fight against the Bolshevik Enlightenment, these strong Red Army soldiers and the now able to read worker, symbolized by a trusty print worker protected by a Red Army soldier, as we see here, with the factories in the background to represent technology and new and improving industry in Russia. Revolutionary theater. So playwright I can't pronounce this name. Vsevolod Meyerhold was responsible for the nationalization of Russian theater. The fact that it was nationalized strengthened communist influence over the arts, and plays depicting scenes from the Civil War and the October Revolution were especially popular. As you can imagine, they presented the Bolsheviks as strong and always working for the rights of the workers. There was mass involvement in some of these plays that were really spectacles for audiences, such as recreating the storming of the Winter Palace, which fostered a cultural memory of the revolution among ordinary people. So even when, people who were children during the October Revolution, when they grew up and saw these huge spectacles that tried to recreate the storming of the Winter Palace, they were given this cultural memory, this shared memory with the Russian people that really presented the Bolsheviks as a strong and united front. So this enabled everyday people to engage in the drama, passion, and symbolic meaning of the October Revolution. One example is a 1920 performance, which was held around Palace Square, involving a 500-piece orchestra, 8,000 participants, and 100,000 spectators. So these plays were instrumental in influencing the attitudes and views of the Russian people. Let's have a look at political repression in the new society. So Vladimir Lenin is quoted as saying, "We have risen to the highest and at the same time the most difficult stage of our historic struggle. Our enemy at the present moment and in the present period is not the same one that faced us yesterday." So let's first look at comparing the Cheka, the political police during the new regime, with the Okhrana, the political police during Tsarist times. Here's a quote from historian George Leggett. which I forgot to color code, the Cheka continued a long Tsarist political police tradition, but differed both quantitatively and qualitatively from its immediate predecessor. Now, the Okhrana housed 15,000 staff. Now you can see the Okhrana's badge over here. And 14,000 people were killed in the last 50 years of Tsarist rule by the Okhrana. Compare that with the Cheka, which had 100,000 staff with a further 160,000 Chekist troops. So 260,000 versus 15,000. Here we again see the Cheka symbol, the badge, the sword of the revolution. And compared to 14,000 killed in 50 years, the Cheka killed up to 140,000, so 10 times more than the Okhrana, plus another 140,000 killed during rebellion, such as the Tambov Rebellion and the Kronstadt Rebellion. So the Cheka was far more repressive than the Okhrana, even though this is an example of continuity in terms of political repression, continuity and change. So February 1922, the Cheka was replaced. We're looking at the evolution of the Cheka here. So in February 1922, the Cheka was replaced by the State Political Administration, otherwise known as the GPU. This was a new branch of the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, the NKVD. So GPU police dealt with espionage, crimes against the state, and counter-revolution. Our old friend Ion Felix Straczynski headed both the GPU and the NKVD, and many Cheka staff remained. And the headquarters of the GPU and NKVD was still in the infamous Lubyanka building, which is where the Cheka headquarters were. This changed again a year later. In July 1923, the GPU was renamed to the United States Political Administration, so the UGPU. Whose existence was enshrined in the Russian Constitution. So now initially it was the Cheka was established without being sort of official. They were a sort of unofficial aspect of the Communist Party. But now, from July 1923, the UGPU was officially a part of Russian society in the new regime by being in the Russian Constitution. There were less executions, but more surveillance of citizens and foreigners through the use of government spies. Repression of political opponents. So while formal bans on Mensheviks and SRs were removed during the Civil War, tolerance of political opponents didn't last long. So in 1921, Menshevik and SR support for the February strikes, the strikes which led to the Kronstadt Rebellion, led to both parties again being declared illegal and counter-revolutionary. In the same year, about 2,000 Mensheviks were arrested after the 10th Party Congress in March 1921, with many others fleeing overseas. A year later, in 1922, in both June and August, 34 SRs were brought to trial and accused of plotting terrorist acts, colluding with white generals and organizing strikes. This was the first of Soviet Russia's political show trials. By show trial, we mean that these prisoners had actually already been imprisoned for months and were meant to stick to a rehearsed script, i.e. show trial, and plead guilty to made up charges. Those SRs who cooperated were acquitted and freed. Those who didn't were found guilty and given death sentences. So it didn't exactly align with the rules of law, neither then nor now. Repression of artists and intellectuals. So we've looked at repression of political opponents. Let's look at artists and intellectuals. So in May 1922, Lenin, who was concerned that students could be corrupted, directed the GPU, the new Cheka, to search academic and literary journals for bourgeois influences. By September, 120 intellectuals had been imprisoned or deported. And in September to November 1922, many more intellectuals, under fear of being imprisoned, left Russia with their families. Many academics, writers, musicians, and artists had already fled after the Bolshevik Revolution, fearing what was to come, while some during the Civil War years were arrested and executed by the Cheka for conspiring with counter-revolutionaries. So there's a repression of art and expression, and academic expression as well. Other changes in the new society. So we're going to have a look at daily life and modernization here. So first of all, let's look at daily life in the new society. Society was seen as a reflection of Soviet values and changed to reflect Soviet values. Cities were renamed, such as Leningrad, Trotsk, Sverdlovsk, Stalingrad, and Zinovyevsk. Petrograd, after Lenin's death, was renamed to Leningrad. Christenings replaced by